Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to this service of the celebration of life for Margaret Ward Morland. As you can see, this is going to be a very special service. Her daughters and their families have crafted a service that includes her poetry and their remembrances and all of the wonderful things that are part of her life. So I know that it will be so meaningful to you. All of the music that you're going to hear, with the exception of the hymn at the end, is the poetry that she wrote set to music with the composers' names listed for you in your program. So we take this time to celebrate each of you. You who have come here as comfort and as friends and family, you who have come here to celebrate in your own way, to give thanks for the place she played in your lives, and we thank you for your presence. And we take this time to remember that we are comforted by the thought that not only is Margaret in good hands, but we are in good hands as we go forward into the celebration of her life.
No, okay. Something springs green renews the earth spun in bloom of the sun. Something springs green cleaves the rocks, thims the stream. Something springs green when deaths are touched with thrust of seed. Such is seen in the heart of one in search of a dream. Something springs green.
Good job. Okay. Consider the opossum. Consider how the opossum has not changed in 80 million years, has faced each foe with catatonic coma, grinned its grin, borne its teaspoonful of babies, ranged the continental bridge, and slept through snow. Never prized for fur or flesh, no yen for wit, no word, nor power, too dumb for sin. Ambulation, conversion, and slow, while man developed brain and bodylism. Was the opossum wiser than we know? Consider man's intelligence estranged from nature, trained in bartered barbarism, twisted mind and matter into schism. Consider man in the world he disarranged.
Oh, well, it's so nice to see so many of my beloved family and friends here, so thank you all for coming. The morning after my mother passed away, I woke early, and as I watched the sun rise, it hit me hard that this was a morning my mother would never see. This was a day that she would never know, and the world suddenly felt very empty. She would have loved that particular dawn sky, and if she had been standing beside me, we would have oohed and ahed together. And later, I might well have seen that sunrise transformed into poetry. Her deep engagement with poetry as a writer, as a reader, and as a teacher opened up that whole world to me. She introduced me to the writings of many poets who are still my favorites today. She did that first of all through enclosing multiple copies of different poems cut from the Christian Science Monitor in letters that she sent me. And then later through personal connections with the community of poets and artists and authors that kind of assembled around her. I would often come home from college or some far-flung place to find my parents hosting a writer or a poet who was there to speak at an event at the Poetry Club or the Women's Club or Randolph-Macon Women's College. And one of my favorite memories is of going with my mother to Washington, D.C., to the Library of Congress, and listening there to former U.S. poet laureates reading their poems. And she and I both shared a passion for the poet Stanley Kunitz, And he read, and that was something we talked about for long, long after that. Well, that was her more serious side. She also, as you know, had a keen appreciation for silliness and hilarity. And so thinking of that, the story that came to mind was once the two of us had driven up to Charlottesville from Lynchburg. And I don't remember why. It might have been a doctor's appointment or something. And while there, we stopped at the Whole Foods. And in the parking lot, there was a big sale on cherry saplings. So my parents had just moved into Westminster, Canterbury, and my mother was trying to spruce up her yard. And my daughters had planted some flowers, but she really wanted something larger. So we looked at this cherry sapling, and it was beautiful, and it was on sale. And this was the clincher for my mother. It was really cheap, and it was a good deal. So we bought it, and it wasn't until we carted it back to the car that we realized, how in the world are we going to fit this thing in? And so we struggled, and we finally managed to. But it meant that we drove all the way back to Lynchburg in the midst of these cherry tree branches. And but my mother thought this was a great, hilarious adventure, and that's pretty much what it turned into. So she was completely undaunted by the fact that she was sitting between these prickly branches. And then as a postscript, we did get it back to Lynchburg. My husband and my two daughters planted it, and it thrived. So it turned out fine in the end. And in thinking back on memories about my mother, I keep coming back to her strength. And she was certainly physically strong. She was a great athlete. And one of the many things that we don't quite know what to do with, my sisters and I, are all these championship trophies from their days, my father and my mother's days as the #1 badminton players at New York University summer camp. But what I think more than that is her strength of will. And it wasn't until I was an adult with a family of my own that I realized how difficult it must have been for her to carve out a space for the solitary work of writing poems, while still being all that she needed to be, which was a wife, a mother, an English teacher and tutor, League of Women voter, Peakland Baptist choir singer. But one thing she valued highly, very highly, was the ability to rise to the occasion. And I think that might have been something that came from her mother. But this was something that she always tried to do. And I can remember especially one of her last poetry readings. She wasn't feeling well. She wasn't sure that she could be all that the event demanded. But she drew on that strength of will and absolutely rose to the occasion. And she was brilliant. The audience was enthralled. And she was so relieved afterwards, and we were so proud of her. It's a nice memory to look back on. But I would say, in fact, that throughout her life, whatever the occasion, whatever needed to be done, she absolutely rose to the occasion. And she not only rose to the occasion, but she did so with grace and beauty and wisdom and love, and often with laughter. And I'm just very grateful, and I'm proud to have been her daughter. Thank you.
That I may know no hunger. Lord, be the see thy face transfigured light, to taste the living fountain. The covenant between us, Lord, seals me in sweet communion. Then let thy Spirit enter me, fulfilled, fulfilled, fulfilled in mystic union.
Hi, I'm so grateful to all of you for being here to share in this remembrance with us. My mother said that a poem is new every time it's read or heard. And I think that's true, but it also says so much about my mother and her approach to life. The words that come to mind when I think about her are vibrant, energetic, engaged, adventurous, creative. She taught all of us to embrace life to the fullest, to grab our moments and opportunities, to disregard failure, and to take care of one another to help make this a better world. So these images for me are woven into the incredibly rich experiences that my sisters and I had growing up. Opportunities might have come our father's way to lead us on many adventures, but it was my mother who was the first one to agree to go, and go we did. NYU summer camp, where my father taught summers at Bear Mountain Park, and we lived in a small 3-room cabin with no utilities. And my mother packed for 5 of us, managed 3 kids, and she was the fun mom, because all of the faculty kids would cram into our cabin when we couldn't be outside. When we lived in Hong Kong in the 1960s, my mother found and furnished an apartment, identified schools, and integrated us into a supportive community there. Bethany Beach every summer with the Bailey Sturgises, and annual drives to Birmingham to spend wonderful times that we had with relatives. And all of those long car rides before air conditioning, but we were well fed from a packed cooler and well entertained. She was also the adventurous mom, moving to the Mill Village of South Carolina, where my father wrote his thesis and where bicycles were the mode of transportation. She lost her own father in a tragic boating accident when she was 20. She was still living at home and attending what is now Samford University. And she really mourned this loss for the rest of her life. This might be, I don't really know, what prompted her to leave home when women really didn't do that in those days. And she traveled to further her education at Northwestern, the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and finally UNC Chapel Hill, where she got a master's in literature and met our father. She was often the first in the ocean, eager to camp or picnic, camping trips in West Virginia with the Bromillers. We were always encouraged to invite friends to join us, such as when my father taught at Stetson, where his brother taught in Florida, and we spent the summer there, and Amy and Terry Wingfield came to see us. Karen Bromiller did, and my cousin Tricia Ward came. So my parents' house, kind of as Carol referred to, became a magnet for many interesting visitors, and my mother welcomed everyone. Her cousin Walter frequently came to our home and joined us at Bethany Beach, who in the 50s and 60s had always just traveled to some exotic place like the Amazon. Antek Prebisch from Poland lived with us for a year while he taught at Randolph-Macon. Elka Hellstern became a 4th sister to us after joining us as an AFS student in high school. And the artist Billy Price Carroll and her husband David came for at least a month at a time. So I just rarely remember our home without visitors. She was beautiful, but she was also tough and a tomboy. How could she not be with a father who took her hunting and an older brother that she had to keep up with? And she absolutely doted on her younger brother, Billy, and stayed by his bed when he recuperated from falling out of the bedroom window. We were just remembering that this morning. She was smart, but she did get 1 B in her lifetime, and this factor made the Birmingham newspaper with the headline, "Margaret Ward gets a B." And I have a copy of that newspaper article, but my mother had a story for that one. She absolutely treasured being a part of Kelsey's and Kenneth's growing up, and we were so lucky that the twists and turns of life brought us to live in Lynchburg. She absolutely adored her great-grands, Lily and Max, and she lived for getting to spend 3 days a week with them. She would just come charging with excitement out of Westminster on her walker, and she never walked, she ran with the walker to get into the car. But I'm so grateful to my daughter and son-in-law for the gift of time with Mom that Mom and I had together with Lily and Max. And amazingly, she was able to crawl in Kenneth's teepee with the kids and sit in the little kids' chairs even after the age of 90. And most importantly, she could get back up out of them, something that I could never do. So this important time together reminds me of something my mother says in one of her poems, that we are not continuums after all, we are circles. So whether the life cycles that repeat throughout generations or the world itself as a circle in which everything is interrelated, she always saw those important connections, our need to be involved and to make a difference. And most of all, to cherish our time with one another, and we all definitely cherished our time with her.
Love won't be kept in a cage or measured in a cup. The self-unlocked, spilled out, can then be lifted up. Let go, and let the kingdom come. Within us each in love, receiver, giver one. If self be bound by self, our lives are lost in vain. Oh, let the kingdom come, our lives be bound again. Let go, and let the kingdom come. Within us each in love, receive a giver one. God's liberating grace transforms humanity into a gift of love, that makes us free. Let go, and let the kingdom come. Within us each in love, receive a giver one. So let the kingdom come.
I'll just add to what my sister said about how much it means to have you all here today and how wonderful it is to gather in celebration of my mother's life. So thank you. There's no one who could be more authentic, more empathic, more open and honest, a better listener, or more truly loving than my mother. And this was particularly true when you were talking to her one-on-one. And when you have that kind of experience with someone, you never forget it. And when it's your mother, you're particularly blessed. And this was true for people both inside and outside the family. In our own family, as both my sisters have talked about, there were a number of people we brought in. She welcomed warmly my husband, Mark, our student, Katrina, in the Philippines, who lived with us as a teenager and is actually responsible for the live streaming today. And Katrina asked that I mention today how much that meant to her, the way our mother made her feel right at home. And of course, she's had such a profound influence on so many people and has touched so many lives over her long and rich life. And all of you all here and online too are a testimony to that. But among many other important lessons I learned from her, the most profound one that she taught me, I think, is courage in relationships and to never give up on anyone. I wrote about this when I applied to my Master of Social Work program about 40 years ago now, I think. And after 4 years of studying psychology in college and working with troubled youth, I realized that she and I had had some misunderstandings from childhood, and it didn't feel right to me. And I wanted to work on clearing those up. So I drove from DC to Lynchburg every weekend for a month, and Mama and I just poured our hearts out to each other. And we resolved every single misunderstanding we ever had, and many I didn't even know we did have, and it was an incredibly beautiful and loving process. And this took tremendous open-heartedness and generosity on her part, and I will be forever grateful to her for that. It also meant that starting at age 20, I was able to build a direct, more adult friendship with her that lasted until the moment that she died. And our friendship covered a lot of areas, as you've heard already. Her love of nature was very deep, and I've very much taken that. And a sense of adventure, as you've also heard. She was fun, and she was physically strong and competitive, and she did attribute that to her brothers. And she could have a wicked sense of humor at times, and we seemed to be able to laugh our way out of just about any challenge that came up, whether it was getting stuck together in an airport or lost while driving. The stress would always dissolve into silliness and laughter, and it became an adventure and fun. And Mark and I, for about 10 years, loved taking her on our vacations with us. For example, to a cabin in northern Minnesota in her early to mid-'80s, where she helped paddle our canoe around the Boundary Waters. And to Hawaii to visit Carol and her family, and to Birmingham to visit our relatives there. And we loved sleeping on the floor in her room at every level of the wonderful care at Westminster Canterbury, which I called our slumber parties, and always involved some kind of chocolate. And in addition to sharing a love of nature and adventure, she was one of the few people I could openly share my spiritual beliefs with as they developed, so at very tender stages. We'd talk for hours, if not in person, then on the phone, and finally in her later years, all three of us would share memories and read from Richard Rohr, John O'Donohue, Mary Oliver, many of the writers that she loved on our weekly Skypes that Westminster set up during the pandemic. And these continued till the day that she died. We also sang spirituals and songs that we used to sing on those long car drives. And it meant a lot. And finally, I recognized that as her youngest daughter, at some point I needed to find my own voice. And she had gradually risked doing that later in her own life through her poetry. And she supported me in that way. And my decision to work in psychology, social work, go off to a remote village in Peace Corps, she understood and supported all of that. And at some point I realized I was really just passing on the blessings that she gave to me. And that was especially, I think, a tendency to listen and understand with an open heart. And that's quite a gift. And it's really the kind of gift that keeps on giving over a lifetime and through the generations. And I feel tremendous gratitude for our family and our friends and all of you here today. So thank you.
Live by the Spirit, walk by the Spirit, for the fruit of the Spirit is love, is love. For the fruit of the Spirit is love.
Heirs of the kingdom, slaves are no longer. We are called to freedom through love, through love. We are called to freedom through love. To one another,
Care for each other, for the law is fulfilled by love, by love. Christ is our Savior, Christ is Redeemer, for He saved us from death with His love, His love. For He saved us from death with His love. Led by the Spirit,
led by the Spirit,
led by the Spirit, for He gave us new life in His love, in His love. Blessed by the Spirit,
blessed by the Spirit,
hearts all in worship, and the temple within is our love, is our love, and the temple within is our love.
Many people knew my grandmother by her accomplishments. She was a prolific author and educator. She was the former poet laureate of Virginia. Or some people only simply knew her as the ultimate Southern hostess. The creative arts was her heart, and she had a way with words that was unsurpassed. But to me, she was just Ma. She was my second mother, the woman who cooked spaghetti sauce with mushrooms, who let me toss stuffed animals down her laundry chute, and would giggle when I would get stuck hiding in her Lazy Susan kitchen cabinet. She was the woman who would stand over the stove for hours at Thanksgiving, cooking great turkey gravy that no one could ever quite replicate. She was the woman who instilled in me her love of creative writing, and the woman who tutored me in Latin even well into her 70s. She was the woman who drove with both feet. And she was also the woman who hoarded boxes of shoes that she would never wear. She was the grammar police, the woman who was consistently asking my grandfather to run to the post office at 4:45 to make it before the 5 p.m. mail pickup. And she was the woman who somehow managed to convince a store clerk once to allow her to exchange a tablecloth almost 40 years after she purchased it. She was the woman who ate Breyer's mint chocolate chip ice cream every night in front of Andy Griffith and World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. And she was the woman who humored me by playing along with the pretend tea parties I liked to concoct with her fine china, and would sing folk songs to me when I couldn't sleep. She was so much more than could ever be conveyed in words, and this is the Ma that I will always remember and love. Thank you.
Allegro. Once, walking beside a stream, I came upon a song sunning itself, stretched out in a slow rhythm, rippling in a basque of warm and languid tones. While I watched, it turned on a grace note, bending to reflected obbligato, then rose to brush the bright arpeggios, scattering diamonds on the water from her hair, and shake scintillas of sound off its shoulders, the melody spilling down in folds to melt in pools of cadenced light. It was a tune so haunting, sweet, and gay that now I hear that song whenever I walk beside a stream in sunny weather.
Beauty, truth, love, kindness, riches, all in my memory of this dearest friend of my life. I was only 33 when I met Margaret, and I am 83 now. I treasured her life in my life, and her wisdom in my thinking, and her gifts of her poetry that I still cherish and love and will ever. Here is a treasure. My dear friend, how did I recognize you? By the reflection of my image in your eyes. Such a gift, like a rainbow, flowing both ways, and you and I looking for the treasure together.
As we have shared these stories of one who lived a life of beauty and lived a life appreciating beauty, I want to invite you to join with us now in singing hymn number 793. We're going to sing the first 3 verses. And please stand, but if that's uncomfortable, feel free to sit.
Archibald MacLeish, in his poem Ars Poetica, The Art of Poetry, concluded his poem with a paradoxical statement. A poem should not mean, but be. When I think of Marty Morland, I experience her creative presence as a poem, which just is. She was so transparent in her joie de vivre, her joy of life. She required no analysis, no explanation, just a cherished friend to be enjoyed as a pure gift from God. Her presence embodied her words, which captured her spirit, her depth of compassion, her thanksgiving for the gift of life, her gracious hospitality to family members and friends, her devotion to her Creator, and her delight in God's handiwork. The Morlands were an extended family for Brenda and me and our 3 children. Their station wagon was with a luggage rack on top, was perfect for our family on vacation or study leave. And yes, with no hesitation whatsoever, they swapped cars so we could travel in more adequate space than we could provide. This is an illustration of their generous love and their support of our well-being as a family. A sumptuous meal in their home was an exquisite statement of the attention to detail that they gave not only to the meal, but to every relationship, a demonstration of their abundant love. The arrival of a beautiful amaryllis from Marti, ready to bloom at Christmas time, ever since my retirement 23 years ago. And this past celebration, with Kathy's help, there was the amaryllis. It reminded Brenda and me that Marti's steadfast friendship was for life. Her presence in our lives continues to bless us with every remembrance. Let us then give thanks for the living presence of God in the legacy which is Margaret Ward Morland. Let us pray. Creative presence. In the morning, you are the cradle of the world, making all things new. And in the evening, you are the world's comfort as we come to terms with our losses. You, O God, are the morning mist touching the green earth with moisture. In the evening, you are the evening twilight, calling us to our prayers. You are the early sun announcing the dawning of a promising new day, and the silent night inviting rest and dreams. All of your creation swells with the rhythms of life and death and new birth. These rhythms call us to sing, to laugh, to dance, and to dream. We sing of sorrows born despite anguish, and joys known despite fear. Truly, this is our Father's world. We laugh at mistakes made in our weaknesses and new resolve begun in our strengths. We dance to the harmonies of the universe, the music of the spheres, and the melodies rising from within our own hearts. And we dream of a new creation because it is you, the maker of heaven and earth, who made us and not we ourselves. Receive now our thanksgiving for the life of our beloved mother, grandmother, and devoted friend. Let the consolation of your Holy Spirit and the refreshing words of this poet's heart lift our spirits into your holy presence, where the mystery is resolved in the face of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
The family would like to invite you to join them in a reception that will be in our parlor that's on the same level here. It's just outside, and also just to remind you that there are bathrooms on every level and you can get everywhere in the building by elevator, so just be safe out there. Thank you so much for lending your time and your energy and your love to this moment of celebration. And as you go apart from each other, go blessed by the high ideals offered to us by this beautiful poet. Ideals of freedom, ideals of love, ideals of beauty. Take them with you. Take her with you as you go apart from each other. Go blessed and in peace.